And this is the video for April 22nd. I want you to listen to this video and please fill out the worksheet that goes along with this here. Make sure you pay attention to the entire video, not just writing down the words that show up on the screen. Some of the things are going to have to be written down about what I'm going to say about these colonies. We're going to be focusing on the southern colonies. So the last couple times I've been gone, you should have been focusing on the New England colonies, and then again, the last time I was gone, last Thursday, on the middle colonies. So these here will be the southern colonies. And actually on this one here, some of this is going to be review because one of our first southern colonies will be Virginia. Now I'm hoping throughout this presentation here that we'll be able to explore the southern region of these original 13 colonies. And altogether there are going to be 5 total colonies. They start out as 4 colonies, but we'll learn later on the Carolinas will split into 2. We're going to learn about the founders and the reasons that they were founded for each of these colonies. We also want to explore the dates and then the unique characteristics of each colony as we go through it, both geographically, religiously, economically, maybe even a little bit on government also. Okay, the Mason-Dixon line. This is going to be the first thing I want to talk about. And this is kind of I don't want to say an arbitrary line or an imaginary line. It's what marks the boundary between what's going to be known as northern colonies and southern colonies. Eventually, when the United States is nearing the Civil War, it's going to be kind of the boundary between slavery and non-slavery. Non-slavery to the north, slavery to the south. So the Mason-Dixon line is still something that is referred to in today's world when we're talking about the north and the south. But this was a line that was it was marked out by 2 gentlemen named Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon. I think they were tasked by Virginia to just kind of survey their land, figure out where Virginia land was, the boundary between them and, say, Maryland and things like that. It just became known as the Mason-Dixon line. In the beginning, it had nothing to do with slavery. That will come later on in the lexicon of America. And as you can see on this map then, you've got, it's kind of right here, is the Mason-Dixon line, because here's Virginia and your Carolinas, Maryland is right here and things like that. But it was just kind of seen then later on in the 1800s as kind of that dividing line between the North and the South. And it really does have to deal with the division of the colonies, even at this time period in the 1700s, between slavery down here, which is going to lead to a much different economic system, a whole different way of life, and then the non-slavery up here, the manufacturing centers of the North. This is smaller farms and things like that. Population is also something that's going to be different. You're going to have certainly a lot more people living up here above the Mason-Dixon line than down here, especially free people. Down here, we'll have a lot of slavery. All right. We know that the first colony that was established by the English was Virginia. At first, it was called Jamestown, the first permanent colony. You should have on your map already 1607 is Virginia. Founded by, of course, John Smith. He's known for his motto of no work, no play. Actually, no work, no food. Sorry, no work, no play was the Puritans up in Massachusetts. But anyways, John Smith, he's going to be the one that is credited, not really with founding it, but saving Jamestown in that first year when he made this new policy, the new policy of no work, no food. Later on, of course, he will be, he'll have to go back to England because he's injured in an explosion. Some speculation is that his own people injured him and things like that. And then the starving time is going to happen after he leaves. Then economic success finally will come to Jamestown, roughly around 1612, 1613, when you have John Rolfe bringing back the seed, a tobacco seed that is going to work very well in the climate of the Piedmont of Virginia and things like that. And so then tobacco farming is what's really going to make Jamestown, and then eventually it gets changed to Virginia, very, very successful. And then they have the plantation economy and all that type of stuff that goes on there in Virginia. We've already talked about the House of Burgesses and things like that. Now, the thing with Virginia is that can be used as an example for a lot of the other colonies too, is that there was conflict, of course, because of the Native Americans that were living there. And once the tobacco farming starts, what ends up happening is you end up needing more and more land for the tobacco farms. Not only because you want to plant more tobacco, but eventually the farmers are going to learn that after about a decade of planting tobacco on the same farm, same land, that land goes bad. The nutrients have been sucked out of the soil and things like that, where then you kind of have to leave that land alone for about a decade before it will be able to grow anything. So farmers are going to have to go further and further inland to get more land to plant more tobacco. And of course, who's already on that land? Well, the Indians. And so there's going to be a lot of conflict that's going to occur because of the Europeans have this need for land to plant their cash crops. And this expansion is going to lead to conflicts with the Native Americans. Both the colonists and the Native Americans are going to claim the right to the land. The colonists claim the right to the land based on the fact that they didn't think the Native Americans were using the land properly, because the Native American culture was not about exploiting the land for monetary or for profit. The Native American idea was that land was for everybody to use, and that you were basically just stewards of God on the land, and everybody could share the land. And this was going to lead to conflicts between the two because they have such a different worldview on land. European concept is, I bought this land, it is my land, you cannot be on my land, and I'm going to use that land however possible. Native American concept was, you can buy the land from us, but it really doesn't matter because everybody gets to have this land. The Native Americans really thought the Europeans were kind of foolish by paying money and things like that for land, when they were kind of, the Native American concept was, well, it's everybody's land. And the Native Americans couldn't quite understand then why the Europeans would then forcibly remove Native Americans from land that the Europeans had bought. And so you have these two world cultures that just do not understand each other. And of course, that's going to lead to conflict. It still happens today. Think about your religious wars today between Islam and Judaism and maybe even Christianity and things like that. But they both believed they were entitled to the land, and they just could not understand the other person's way of life. And of course, leads to lots of wars, death. The Native Americans are certainly going to lose the wars. They may win a battle here and there, but they're going to lose the wars, mainly because of disease and what have you. But then, of course, through force and stuff like that, more and more Europeans are going to keep coming over, and they're just going to overwhelm the Native Americans. But what does happen is it does actually lead to some more conflict in Virginia by Nathaniel Bacon. You should have read about this or already done some work with this here, so this is kind of a review. But Nathaniel Bacon was an indentured servant. So he was someone that could not afford his way from England over to the Americas. So he will sign a contract, and then he's going to work for a plantation owner in the Americas, in Virginia, for about 7 years. Eventually, he's going to get his freedom. And in the contract, what happens is that an indentured servant like Bacon and others, they're supposed to be given land and then given a chance to succeed on their own also. But what's happening at this time in Virginia is that Native Americans are attacking these farmers like Nathaniel Bacon and others that were once indentured servants, and they're kind of on the frontier of Virginia, closer to the Appalachian Mountains. And Nathaniel Bacon and others, they want help from the government of Virginia, the House of Burgesses and things like that. The problem is the House of Burgesses don't want to have conflict with the Native Americans. And the House of Burgesses are mainly run by the plantation owners. They really don't care for Nathaniel Bacon and his other small farmers. They actually want those small farmers to go away, and then those plantation owners can take over those small farms. So Nathaniel Bacon's going to lead a rebellion against the House of Burgesses in Jamestown, also against the Native Americans. I think first they fight the Native Americans, and then they're considered to be criminals by the House of Burgesses and the governor. And Nathaniel Bacon and his men will eventually come riding into Jamestown. They'll light the House of Burgesses government building on fire, burn it down. The governor and other members have to flee Jamestown. Eventually, what's going to happen is Nathaniel Bacon dies. I think he dies of like pneumonia or sickness or something like that. A few weeks later, the rebellion fizzles away. It dies with when the leader dies also. But what it does is it just highlights this tension that is just constantly going to be there between the colonials. It's going to be there between the frontier settlers and the Native Americans. So you kind of like different conflicts. You have the conflict between farmers and the Native Americans, but then you also have the conflict between small farmers and the large farmers, the plantation owners that run the government. And there's the small farmers are pretty much caught in the middle of everybody. But these conflicts are going to go on well into the Civil War hundreds of years later. All right, so we move on now to Maryland. Maryland, as you can see, is 1632. What it gets set up for is for Catholics. It is strictly the purpose of Maryland in the beginning was to be a safe haven for the Catholics in England or in other parts of Europe. It was founded by Lord Baltimore. I believe Lord Baltimore was a friend of the king at that time, or his family was at least. And of course, Catholics are being mistreated in Europe, especially by the Protestant movement, especially in England, where you have to be Anglican. So he wants to set up a little place here in America that can be strictly for Catholics, and that becomes Maryland. And of course, that's why Baltimore is in Maryland today and stuff like that. Do understand Baltimore is not the capital, though, but it was named after this man here. What they're going to have then is it's strictly for Catholics in the beginning, but eventually Lord Baltimore and others are going to realize, gosh, we're kind of limiting ourselves by only allowing Catholics in our colony, that what they do is they end up passing this thing called the Act of Toleration. And what it's going to do is grant freedom to basically all Christians, Catholics and Protestants. They want to have everybody that they can to come into Maryland to make Maryland more successful. It's kind of like Pennsylvania when William Penn opens up Pennsylvania basically for religious freedom. It's what's going to make Pennsylvania pretty much successful as a middle colony. One of the most successful colonies in the New World has to deal with the fact that they just basically allow everybody to come into their colony. And that's kind of what Maryland eventually will do also. And as you see, Maryland's going to be very rich in natural resources, and then, of course, that religious diversity, so that people will flock to that area. But it's going to be the natural resources that really make it successful, and then makes it special for England, so that they can send back those resources to England, and England can get rich off of those resources. But that's where Maryland comes in the sequence here. 1632, founded for the Catholics, and then eventually for all Christian religious people can come into England. And then it's going to be an economic place. They're going to really be wealthy in Maryland. All right, we have the Carolinas now. So in the beginning, it's just the Carolinas, named after Caroline, one of the king's daughters, things like that. But anyways, eventually it will split up. So in 1653, it is founded as one colony. And I believe these are just people from Virginia that want to get out of Virginia, away from the House of Burgesses. And so they petition the king for their own little royal charter, things like that. And so the king grants them land south of Virginia, and this becomes the Carolinas. Originally, it's one colony, but it will split mainly because the northern part and the southern part, they just grow differently. In North Carolina, it's a lot of small farmers. You got wooded lands and things like that. So it's just pretty much your small, maybe even your grain farms like corn and other type wheat, stuff like that. But your southern part of Carolina is going to be more of your large plantations that are going to be relying heavily on slavery, just like it says here for the Caribbean, the English islands in the Caribbean that are sugar plantations. In South Carolina, you have these much larger plantations, tobacco, rice, and other things that are going to lead to more slavery in South Carolina, almost to the point where in South Carolina, at the start of the Civil War in 1861, you actually have more slaves than you do free white people in South Carolina. But eventually, after 10 years in 1663, they are going to split into two different colonies because they are pretty much growing differently. But yeah, the Carolinas are really just for farming reasons. It didn't have anything to do with religion and all that. It was more of the economic reasons and farming and large plantations and things like that. All right. This is our last colony that needed to be founded, and this was Georgia, 1732. So this is the only one that was founded in the 1700s. Really, really late compared to all the other ones. And it has a lot to do with trouble that was going on in England. At this time in history in England, they had a thing called debtor's prison. So if you went into debt and you couldn't pay off your debt, you went to prison. And a lot of farmers were going to prison in the late 1720s, 1730s, because they had taken out loans to buy farmland and other seeds and things like that for their farms. And then, of course, through some droughts and some other unfortunate circumstances, they could not pay back their loans. And the policy was you go to prison. And then if you couldn't pay off your loan after a year or so, the land was taken from you. It was all kinds of nasty stuff. Well, of course, you're smart enough to even know, well, if they're in prison, how are they going to make money to pay off the loans? And that was the problem with the debtor's prison. What ends up happening is you have this guy named James Oglethorpe, and he has some friends that are farmers here in England, and they're going to be in prison, and he feels real bad for them and their families. He petitions the king, who is also a friend of James Oglethorpe's, and basically Oglethorpe convinces the king to relieve these prisons. Like, they were getting overcrowded with these debtors and things like that, pretty nasty, and people were dying in them. And Oglethorpe petitions the king, King George, I believe at the time, said, hey, I've got an idea. What if we send these debtors over to the New World, over to the Americas? So the king agrees eventually, and he grants Oglethorpe a piece of land south of South Carolina. Originally, these men were to go there and be kind of a buffer zone to the Native Americans that would be in Florida and things like that, but also as a Native American or as a buffer zone to the Spanish that controlled Florida. The king feared that the Spanish would move an army up from Florida through this land, and they would hit South Carolina, North Carolina, and things like that. So really, he sent these debtors over to what becomes Georgia as kind of just like as your first line of defense against an attack from the Spanish and things like that. And then he basically just said, go over there, and if you can farm, you can farm. If you can't, whatever. Just protect my other 12 colonies from any attacks from the Spanish and Native Americans and things like that. But eventually what ends up happening is Georgia, these men go over there and they're farmers. They know what they're doing. They see this land, they come to this land, and they start doing what's natural to them, and they farm it. And it becomes very lucrative for England. It becomes very good at planting cotton. Cotton was starting to grow. It wasn't the cotton that's going to be famous of the 1800s, but they can plant tobacco there, cotton and other crops and things like that, and send that back to England too. So there's also an economic gain to England from having Georgia. So not just as a way to unclog their prisons in England, but also a buffer zone against attacks from the Spanish and Native Americans, but it also works economically for the King of England also. So there we have it. You've got economic opportunities primarily in the southern colonies. Maryland for the religious purposes, but pretty much Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia, they're going to be all based around agriculture. And that's pretty much how it's going to be in the South, this below the Mason-Dixon line for the next 150 years, even after the Civil War. Tobacco, rice, going to be these major cash crops in the beginning. But then, of course, the labor, and we didn't talk about it yet. We'll talk about it down the road. But slavery, how slavery is just going to be seen as a necessity down here in the South because of this labor-intensive agricultural industry that they're going to grow in these southern colonies. And that's the slave people. All right, real quickly, you can look at this here for reviewing and stuff like that. But that pretty much ends our 13 colonies. We've set up all 13 colonies. Now it's just a matter of us getting life in the colonies. What was life like in the colonies? We'll start talking about some of the more famous people that we know of from colonial times that will lead into the Revolutionary War times. But now that we have these colonies set up, now we start taking a look at how they grew really apart from England. They were allowed to pretty much grow on their own and things like that. We'll talk about a thing called salutary neglect coming up. All right, so thanks for doing that, guys. Please do a good job today, and I'll see you down the road.